The morning sun cast long shadows across the cemetery of Dustwater as Eleanor Whitmore stood beside the fresh grave of her husband. The wooden cross bore his name in simple letters: Samuel Whitmore, 1,845 to 1,883 inches. The preacher's words drifted past her like tumbleweeds, meaningless sounds in the desert wind. She kept her eyes fixed on the mound of red earth, her black mourning dress already collecting dust from the New Mexico soil. "Such a tragedy," whispered Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife, though her tone suggested more satisfaction than sorrow. "They say it was bound to happen, what with Samuel's associations." Eleanor's jaw tightened beneath her veil. The vultures had barely waited for the body to cool before descending with their gossip and judgment. Samuel had been many things: cold, calculating, occasionally cruel. But he had been her husband, and she would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break. The small crowd began to disperse, leaving Eleanor alone with her in-laws. Margaret Whitmore, Samuel's mother, approached with the bearing of a queen surveying her domain. Her black silk rustled like crow's wings. "We need to discuss the bank," Margaret said without preamble. "And the house, of course. Samuel would have wanted—" "Samuel is dead," Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "What he wanted died with him." Thomas Whitmore, her father-in-law, stepped forward. His face bore the same sharp angles as his late son's, the same calculating eyes. "You're overwrought, my dear. Perhaps it would be best if you stayed with us for a time. We can manage the estate. The estate is mine." Eleanor lifted her chin. The will was quite clear. A will written under duress, no doubt. Margaret sniffed. "A young woman like you, barely 25, cannot possibly manage." "I managed well enough while Samuel was alive." The lie came easily. She had managed nothing. Samuel had kept her as isolated as a bird in a gilded cage. But they didn't need to know that. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "There are rumors, Eleanor, unsavory talk about Samuel's death, about the man who killed him, Callum Briggs." The name tasted like ashes in her mouth. The former bank guard, dismissed 6 months ago for what Samuel had called insubordination. The man who had looked at her with eyes the color of storm clouds, who had tipped his hat to her on the street despite Samuel's fury. The man who, according to the sheriff, had shot Samuel during the robbery 2 nights ago. "That outlaw will hang when they catch him," Thomas said with grim satisfaction. "And they will catch him. Sheriff Morrison has already sent word to the territorial marshals." Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. She remembered Callum's last day at the bank, the way he'd stood in Samuel's office, refusing to back down over something. She'd never learned what. She remembered the controlled violence in his stance, the way his hand had hovered near his gun. Samuel had been afraid of him. She'd seen it in her husband's eyes. "We'll call on you tomorrow," Margaret announced, "to begin sorting through Samuel's papers. There's much to be done." Eleanor watched them leave, their expensive carriage kicking up dust as it rolled toward the better part of town. She stood alone by the grave until the sun reached its zenith, thinking about the man in the ground and the man who'd put him there. The Dusty Rose Saloon squatted on Main Street like a diseased toad, its painted sign faded by years of desert sun. Eleanor had never set foot inside. Respectable women didn't frequent such establishments. But respectability had died with Samuel, and the afternoon shadows gave her courage. She paused at the bat-wing doors, adjusting her veil. Inside, she could hear the clink of glasses, the low rumble of men's voices, the tinny melody of an out-of-tune piano. Then, cutting through it all, came the sharp crack of gunfire. Eleanor pushed through the doors as chaos erupted. Tables overturned, men dove for cover, and in the center of the room stood Callum Briggs. He looked exactly as she remembered, yet utterly changed. 6 months of running had carved new lines into his face, turned his skin to leather beneath the desert sun. His dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. But his eyes, those storm cloud eyes, remained sharp and clear as he faced down a man Eleanor recognized as Jake Morrison, one of the territory's most notorious bounty hunters. 30 pieces of silver. Morrison? Callum's voice was soft, dangerous. That what my life's worth these days? Dead or alive, the poster says. Morrison grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. I figured dead's easier. The two men circled each other like wolves. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. She should leave, should run, but something held her frozen. Perhaps it was the way Callum moved. Fluid, controlled, like a man who had accepted his fate but refused to go quietly. Morrison went for his gun first. Callum's hand moved faster. The bounty hunter crumpled, clutching his shooting arm. Blood seeped between his fingers as he cursed and writhed on the sawdust-covered floor. Callum's gun remained steady, smoke curling from the barrel. Next time, I won't aim for your arm, Callum said quietly. He backed toward the door, gun still drawn, his eyes scanning the room. They found Eleanor, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or regret. Mrs. Whitmore. He touched the brim of his hat with his free hand, a gesture so incongruous with the violence of moments before that Eleanor felt hysteria bubble in her throat. Then he was gone, leaving only swinging doors and the groans of the wounded bounty hunter. Eleanor found herself the center of attention. The saloon's patrons, cowboys, drifters, handful of town men who should have known better, stared at her with a mixture of shock and speculation. You shouldn't be here, ma'am, the bartender said, not unkindly. This ain't no place for a lady, especially not now. Eleanor straightened her spine. I was passing by. I heard the commotion. Best you move along then. Sheriff will be here soon, and there'll be questions. She nodded, gathering her skirts. As she turned to leave, Morrison grabbed her ankle with his good hand. You're his woman, he gasped. Whitmore's widow. Briggs killed him for you, didn't he? Didn't he? Eleanor jerked free, stumbling backward. You're delirious from blood loss, Mr. Morrison. I seen the way he looked at you. Morrison's grin was feral despite his pain. Everyone knows Briggs had eyes for the banker's pretty wife, finally decided to take what he wanted. That's enough. Eleanor's voice came out harder than she intended. My husband died in a robbery. Nothing more. She fled the saloon, Morrison's laughter following her into the street. Her hands shook as she walked, her mind racing. Callum Briggs, here in town. Bold as brass. The rational part of her said she should tell the sheriff, should help them catch her husband's killer. But another part, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, remembered the flicker in those storm cloud eyes when he'd seen her. Night fell over Dustwater like a shroud. Eleanor sat in her parlor. The lamps turned low, trying to make sense of the bank's ledgers. Samuel had kept his own system, one she'd never been permitted to understand. Now the numbers swam before her eyes, meaningless columns that might hold the key to their future, or their ruin. A floorboard creaked overhead. Eleanor's hand froze on the pen. The house was empty. She'd dismissed the servants after the funeral, unable to bear their pitying looks. Another creak, deliberate this time. Someone was in her house. She reached for Samuel's pistol, kept in the desk drawer. Her fingers fumbled with the unfamiliar weight. Samuel had forbidden her to touch it, but Samuel was beyond caring now. Footsteps on the stairs. Eleanor stood, the gun trembling in her grip. The parlor door opened slowly, and she raised the weapon. Easy there, Mrs. Whitmore. Callum Briggs stood in her doorway, hands raised, a wry smile playing at his lips. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the way he favored his left side. You're hurt, she said, then cursed herself for the observation. Morrison's friends found me before I could clear town. He lowered his hand slowly. May I come in? I promise I mean you no harm. You killed my husband. Yes. The simple admission hit her like a physical blow. She'd expected denials, explanations, Anything but that quiet certainty. Then why should I not shoot you where you stand? Because you're holding that Colt all wrong, for one thing. He stepped into the room, moving with the careful grace of a wounded predator. Because if you were going to shoot me, you'd have done it already. And because you need to know the truth. I know the truth. You robbed the bank. Samuel tried to stop you. Callum's laugh was bitter. Is that what they're saying? Samuel Whitmore, the hero banker? He sank into a chair without invitation, pressing a hand to his side. It came away dark with blood. Eleanor kept the gun trained on him, though her arms ached from the weight. If you've come to kill me too? If I wanted you dead, you'd never have seen me coming. The words were matter of fact, not boastful. No, Mrs. Whitmore, I came to warn you. Warn me? They're coming for you, tonight, the same men who wanted your husband dead. That's absurd. Samuel died in a robbery. Samuel died because he knew too much and got greedy. Callum's eyes never left hers. Just like you're going to die if you don't listen to me. As if to punctuate his words, glass shattered in the kitchen. Eleanor spun toward the sound, and Callum was on his feet despite his injury, his own gun drawn. Back door, he said quietly. 2, maybe 3 men. You know how to use that thing, or is it just for show? More glass breaking. Footsteps. No longer trying for stealth. No time. Callum grabbed her arm. We go out the window. Now. I'm not going anywhere with you. Then you'll die in this parlor, and they'll make it look like the grieving widow couldn't bear life without her husband. His grip tightened. Your choice, Eleanor. Come with the man you hate, or stay and join him in the ground. The footsteps were in the hallway now. Eleanor could hear voices, rough and unfamiliar. In that moment, all her carefully constructed walls crumbled. She looked into Callum Briggs's eyes, killer's eyes, perhaps, but honest ones, and made her choice. The window, she whispered. They went through it together. Eleanor's morning dress catching on the frame, tearing as they tumbled into the garden. Behind them, men's voices rose in anger at finding the parlor empty. Callum pulled her to her feet, and they ran through the darkness toward the stable. Can you ride? He asked as he saddled his horse, a ragged bay that had seen better days. Of course I can ride. I mean really ride. Not side saddle in the park on Sundays. Eleanor hiked up her skirts. Dignity be damned. I can manage. He helped her mount behind him, her arms going around his waist by necessity. She could feel the wet warmth of blood through his shirt. Where are we going? Away from here. He spurred the horse into motion. Hold tight, Mrs. Whitmore. You're about to find out what lies beyond the edge of your respectable world. As dust water fell away behind them, and the desert night swallowed them whole, Eleanor Whitmore realized she had crossed a line from which there could be no return. She was riding into the darkness with her husband's killer, leaving behind everything she had ever known. The widow was riding at midnight, behind the gunslinger she had sworn to hate, and God help her, she had never felt more alive. The desert night wrapped around them like a cold blanket as they rode hard through the rocky passes. Eleanor's arms ached from holding onto Callum. Her legs burned from gripping the horse's flanks, and the torn morning dress offered little protection against the biting wind. She had never ridden astride before, never felt the raw power of a horse beneath her without the civilized barrier of a side saddle. Where are we going? She shouted over the thunder of hooves. Quiet, Callum commanded, pulling the horse to a sudden stop. He tilted his head, listening. In the distance, Eleanor could hear it too, the sound of pursuit, multiple riders following their trail. Down here. He guided the horse off the main path into a narrow canyon barely visible in the moonlight. The walls rose up on either side, so close Eleanor's knees scraped against the rock. They moved slowly now, the horse picking its way through loose stones and scrub brush, after what felt like hours but was probably less than one. Callum turned the horse up a steep incline. Eleanor had to press her face against his back to keep from sliding off, breathing in the scent of leather, sweat, and blood. There, He pointed to a dark shadow against the canyon wall. A cave, or perhaps an overhang. We'll rest the horse. He dismounted first, then helped Eleanor down. Her legs buckled immediately, muscles screaming from the unfamiliar position. Callum caught her before she fell, his hand steady despite his injury. Easy. You did well for a town lady. I'm not as delicate as you assume. Mr. Briggs. She pulled away from his support, though her legs still trembled. No, he said quietly, studying her in the moonlight. I'm beginning to see that. He led the horse under the overhang and began unsaddling it with practiced efficiency. Eleanor watched him work, noting how he favored his injured side, how his movements were careful and economical. You need to tend that wound, she said. Later. You'll be no good to either of us if you bleed to death. He paused, then nodded. There's whiskey in the saddlebags, and some clean cloth. Eleanor found both, along with hardtack, jerky, and ammunition. The supplies of a man always ready to run. She returned to find Callum had removed his vest and was struggling with his shirt. Let me... The words came out before she could stop them. He stilled, then nodded. Eleanor helped him peel away the blood-soaked fabric, revealing a lean torso marked by scars both old and new. The fresh wound was a deep graze along his ribs, painful but not fatal if kept clean. Morrison's friend had better aim than he did, Callum said through gritted teeth as she poured whiskey over the wound. Hold still. Eleanor tore strips from her petticoat. The fine linen was cleaner than anything in his saddlebags. She wound the makeshift bandage around his chest, trying not to notice the heat of his skin, the way his breathing changed when her fingers brushed against him. Why did you come to warn me? She asked as she tied off the bandage. Because you don't deserve to die for your husband's sins. And what were his sins, exactly? Callum pulled on his shirt slowly. How much do you know about your husband's business dealings? I know he ran the bank. I know he was successful. Successful? Callum's laugh was hollow. Is that what you call it when a man takes deposits from honest folks and funnels them to pay off territorial judges? When he forges land deeds to steal from Mexican farmers who've worked that soil for generations? Eleanor's hand stilled. You're lying. Check his private ledgers. The real ones. Not the ones he showed the bank board. Bottom drawer of his desk. Hidden panel on the left side. He met her gaze steadily. I know because I helped him move the money for 6 months before I understood what I was part of. Then you're as guilty as he was. Yes. No excuses. No justifications. Just that simple acknowledgement. When I tried to quit, he threatened to frame me for embezzlement. When I refused to back down, he had me fired and blacklisted, made sure no honest work would come my way. So you killed him for revenge? I killed him because he drew on me first. Callum's voice was flat. I went to the bank that night to get evidence, documents that would prove what he'd been doing. He was supposed to be at the poker game. Instead, I found him burning papers in his office. Eleanor remembered now, Samuel leaving the house that night, saying he had business at the bank. She'd thought nothing of it. He offered me money to leave town, Callum continued. When I refused, he went for his gun. He was always too slow. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant cry of a coyote. Eleanor tried to reconcile this version of events with the man she'd been married to for 5 years. The terrible thing was, she could believe it. She'd seen Samuel's cruelty in small ways, felt the cold calculation behind his every kindness. The men who came tonight, she said finally. Who are they? Judge Patterson's boys, most likely, or maybe Sheriff Morrison's cousins. Your husband wasn't the only one profiting from those schemes. With him dead and me blamed for it, they thought they were safe. But then you didn't sell the bank to them like a proper grieving widow should. My in-laws tried to convince me. Eleanor stopped, the pieces clicking into place. They're part of it. The whole town's rotten. Mrs. Whitmore, built on stolen land and stolen money, with your husband's bank as the heart of it all. Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the overhang. The desert stretched endlessly before her, silver and black in the moonlight. Behind her lay Dustwater and everything she'd known. Ahead lay nothing but uncertainty. I can't simply take your word for all this. Don't have to. But you'll need to decide what you believe before those men catch up to us. Callum joined her at the edge, moving stiffly. They will catch up, you know. I'm slowing down, and that horse can't carry 2 riders forever. Then leave me. Surely they won't harm a woman. They'll harm anyone who threatens their interests. And you, Mrs. Whitmore, inherited the biggest threat of all knowledge of where the bodies are buried, even if you don't realize it yet. A cold wind swept up from the canyon, and Eleanor shivered in her torn dress. Without a word, Callum retrieved a blanket from his saddlebags and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was gentle, unexpected from a man with such capable violence in his hands. You should sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. I couldn't possibly. Try. Tomorrow will be harder than today. Eleanor settled against the rock wall, pulling the rough blanket tight. It smelled of horse and campfire smoke, nothing like the lavender-scented linens of her marriage bed. She watched Callum take up position at the entrance, rifle across his knees, silhouetted against the stars. Why did you look at me that way? The question escaped before she could call it back. He didn't turn. What way? In town. When you worked at the bank. Like you saw something in me. I saw a wild thing trying to convince itself it was tame. His voice was soft, carried on the wind. I recognized the look. See it in the mirror every day. Eleanor closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself thinking of all the small rebellions she'd swallowed over the years. All the times she'd bitten her tongue and smiled prettily while Samuel made decisions about her life. She thought of the account books waiting in his study, of secrets hidden in false drawers, of a town built on lies. When she opened her eyes again, the sky was lightening in the east, painting the canyon walls in shades of rose and gold. Callum was still at his post, though she could see the toll the night had taken in the slump of his shoulders. You should have woken me to take a turn. He glanced back, almost smiled. You know how to use a rifle. Mrs. Whitmore. No, but I could learn. I believe you could. He stood, stretching carefully. We need to move. There's an old logging camp about 10 miles north, abandoned now, but there's shelter and water. Eleanor rose, her body protesting every movement. The fine kid boots she'd worn to the funeral were already ruined, the hem of her black dress shredded. She looked nothing like the respectable banker's widow who'd stood by an open grave just yesterday. As Callum saddled the horse, Eleanor made a decision. She walked to the saddlebags and pulled out the pistol he'd taken from her house. Teach me. He turned, eyebrows raised. Now? If I'm going to run, I should know how to fight. She held the weapon awkwardly, but with determination. Unless you plan to protect me forever. Something shifted in his expression. Forever's a dangerous word out here. Then we'd better start with today. He moved behind her, adjusting her grip on the pistol. His hands covered hers, steady and warm, positioning her fingers correctly. Eleanor tried to focus on the instruction, not on his proximity, not on the way his breath stirred her hair. Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze it gentle, like you're afraid it might break. His voice was low in her ear. And don't close your eyes when you fire. You need to see what you're aiming at. Have you killed many men? The question was too intimate, but the dawn seemed to strip away propriety. Enough to know it changes you each time. He stepped back. Aim for that Joshua tree, the one with the broken branch. Eleanor fired. The recoil knocked her back a step, and the shot went wide. Again, Callum said. This time, plant your feet. 3 more shots, each closer to the target. On the 4th, she clipped the broken branch. Natural talent, he observed. Or maybe just good motivation. They mounted up again, Eleanor behind him as before, the pistol now tucked into the blanket at her waist. As they wound through the canyon, she found herself studying the landscape with new eyes. Every shadow could hide a threat. every ridge a vantage point for ambush. The comfortable blindness of her town life had been stripped away, leaving her raw to the world's dangers. "There," Callum pointed to dust rising in the south. "3 riders, maybe 4, moving fast." "How long until they catch us?" "At this pace, 2 hours, maybe less." Eleanor pressed closer to him, feeling the tension in his body. "You're hurting. I'll manage." That's what Samuel used to say, usually right before he made a terrible decision. Callum actually chuckled at that. "Fair point. But unless you've got a fresh horse hidden in that torn-up dress, we work with what we have." They pushed harder, the horse laboring now under the double weight and the rising heat. The sun climbed mercilessly, and Eleanor's fair skin, unused to exposure, began to burn. The logging camp appeared like a mirage, a cluster of wooden structures huddled against a pine-covered slope. "Thank God," Eleanor breathed. "Don't thank him yet," Callum said grimly. "This is where we make our stand." The logging camp stood like a ghost town against the pine-covered slope, its weathered buildings testament to dreams abandoned when the timber ran out. Callum guided the exhausted horse between the structures, his eyes scanning for defensive positions, while Eleanor marveled at how quickly her world had changed. Yesterday she'd been a respectable widow. Today she was an outlaw's accomplice. "The main house," Callum decided, pointing to a 2-story structure with thick log walls. "Best sight lines, and there's a well out back." They dismounted, and Eleanor's legs nearly betrayed her again. The sun was climbing higher, and her morning dress, designed for somber indoor occasions, had become an instrument of torture. The heavy black fabric trapped heat like an oven, and the corset beneath, laced tight that morning by servants she'd since dismissed, made each breath a struggle. Inside the main house, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through broken windows. Furniture lay scattered and overturned, and the smell of decay and abandonment hung heavy in the air. "Help me with these." Callum began dragging a heavy table toward one window. Eleanor grabbed the other end, and together they created a makeshift barricade. They worked in efficient silence, fortifying positions, checking sight lines. It reminded Eleanor absurdly of preparing for one of her husband's dinner parties, except instead of arranging flowers, she was learning to anticipate bullets. "They'll try to talk first," Callum explained as he checked his rifle. "Make you an offer to come quiet. Don't listen. Men like these, their promises are worth less than dust. And after talking fails, then we remind them why cornering desperate people is a mistake." Eleanor watched him move through the space, noting how even wounded and exhausted, he maintained a predator's grace. "You've done this before, more times than I care to count." He paused at a window, studying the approach. "Started young. Orphan boy in Texas doesn't have many options besides the gun or the gospel, and I never had the temperament for preaching." "How young?" 14 when I killed my first man. He was trying to steal the horse I'd spent 6 months breaking. 16 when the Rangers recruited me. 20 when I realized the badge didn't make the killing any cleaner." Eleanor absorbed this information while tearing more strips from her petticoat for bandages. The fine linen seemed absurd now, like fragments of another life. "Is that when you became an outlaw?" "That's when I became nothing." His voice carried no self-pity, just fact. "Drifted for years, hired gun, scout, whatever paid, thought working for your husband's bank might be different. Steady work, honest wages." He laughed bitterly. "Should have known better. Men like Samuel Whitmore don't hire men like me for honest work." "Why did you stay 6 months if you knew—" "I didn't know at first. Your husband was clever about it. Small things that seemed legitimate enough. Move this money to that account. Deliver these papers to Judge Patterson. Guard this meeting with territorial officials." He moved to another window. By the time I pieced it together, I was in too deep. And then he trailed off. Eleanor waited, but he seemed lost in thought. "And then I started watching you." The admission came quiet, almost reluctant. Saw how he treated you, like a prize mare, valuable, worth showing off, but not worth listening to. Saw you at those bank functions, smiling while your eyes went dead. Made me remember why I'd left the Rangers, too much protecting the wrong people from the right ones. Heat flooded Eleanor's cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. You had no right to watch me. No, he agreed. But I did it anyway. Just like I had no right to want to put a bullet in your husband every time he grabbed your arm too hard or cut you off mid-sentence. Just like I have no right to be glad you're here with me now, even though it's likely going to get you killed. The confession hung between them like a challenge. Eleanor found herself moving toward him, drawn by something she didn't want to name. Mr. Briggs. Callum, he corrected. Figure if we're going to die together, might as well use given names. Callum. The name felt foreign on her tongue. I need you to know something. Whatever happens, I made my choice. Not because you forced me, not because I had no options. I chose this. He turned from the window to face her fully. Why? Because for the first time in my life, someone told me the truth, even if it was ugly, even if it hurt. She met his storm cloud eyes steadily. My whole marriage was built on lies, pretty lies, comfortable lies, but lies all the same. At least with you, I know where I stand. You stand in a broken-down logging camp with a wounded outlaw, waiting for men who want to kill you. His voice roughened. That's not much of a trade, Eleanor. Her name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. Before she could respond, he stiffened, head cocked. They're here. Eleanor peered through a crack in the barricade. 4 riders approached slowly, spread out in a half circle. She recognized Deputy Morrison at the lead, his arm still in a sling from yesterday's confrontation. The others were strangers, hard men with badges that meant nothing and guns that meant everything. Mrs. Whitmore, Morrison called out. We know you're in there. Come out now, and we can all go home peaceful-like. Callum positioned himself at another window, rifle ready. He nodded to Eleanor, who took a deep breath. What do you want? She called back. Want to help you, ma'am. That outlaw, Briggs, he's got you confused. Filled your head with lies about your poor husband. Come on out, and we'll see you safe back to town. And Callum, he'll face justice for his crimes. Fair trial, I promise you that. Callum snorted softly. Fair's the trial they gave Jesus. Maybe. I need time to think. Eleanor called. 5 minutes. Morrison replied. Then we come in. Eleanor pulled back from the window. 4 men. You're wounded. I can barely shoot. The odds have been worse. Callum checked his ammunition with methodical calm. Listen, when this starts, you stay low. Use that pistol only if they get inside. And Eleanor, he caught her arm gently. If I go down, you run, out the back, into the trees. Don't look back. I won't leave you. You will if I tell you to. His grip tightened slightly. Promise me. She saw in his eyes that this mattered to him, maybe more than his own survival. I promise. Good. He released her, moving back to his position. Get ready. The 5 minutes passed like hours. Eleanor crouched behind overturned furniture, pistol heavy in her hands. Petticoat strips wrapped around her palms to prevent blisters. Her fine morning dress was now so torn and dusty, it looked like rags, her carefully pinned hair falling wild around her shoulders. She thought of the woman who'd stood by her husband's grave just yesterday and felt like she was remembering a stranger. Time's up, Morrison's voice carried clearly. What's it going to be? Eleanor started to answer, but Callum spoke first, his voice carrying through the broken window. Tell you what, Morrison, you and your boys ride away now, and I won't tell everyone how you've been skimming from those land deals. 20% off the top. Wasn't it? Silence. Then Morrison snarled. You're lying. Check the 3rd column in Patterson's books, listed as administrative fees. Your cousin Jake must be real proud, knowing you're following the family tradition. Eleanor watched comprehension dawn on Callum's face as angry voices rose outside, the men arguing among themselves now. Suspicion planted. Smart, she murmured. Won't stop them, but it'll make them sloppy. He glanced at her. When I was watching you all those months, know what I noticed most? The question seemed absurdly timed. What? You're left-handed, but you learned to use your right because someone told you it was proper. Saw you switch your teacup once when you thought no one was looking. Why does that matter now? Because you've been holding that pistol right-handed. He smiled slightly. Try the left. Eleanor switched hands, and immediately the weapon felt more natural. Such a small thing, yet it spoke volumes about how closely he'd observed her, how much he'd seen that others missed. Gunfire shattered the moment. Windows exploded in a shower of glass as the men outside opened fire. Eleanor pressed herself flat, wood splinters raining down. Callum returned fire with careful precision, making each shot count. 2 moving left, he called, shifting position. Eleanor glimpsed shadows through the dust and haze. The barricade held, but barely. She heard footsteps on the porch, the front door splintering. Eleanor, the stairs! She spun to see a man climbing through a side window. Without thinking, she raised the pistol left-handed and fired. The man clutched his shoulder and tumbled backward. Good girl. Callum breathed, but she saw him wince as he moved. Fresh blood seeping through his bandages. The battle intensified. Morrison had found cover behind a woodpile and kept them pinned while his men tried to flank. Eleanor reloaded with shaking fingers, proud when she managed it without fumbling. A man burst through the back door. Callum spun and fired, but his injury made him slow. The shot went wide. The intruder raised his gun toward Callum's exposed back. Eleanor didn't think. She fired twice, and the man crumpled. The pistol felt alive in her hand, like it had been waiting all her life for this moment. She understood now what Callum meant about killing changing you. Something fundamental shifted inside her as she watched the man fall. Behind you! Callum's warning came almost too late. She threw herself sideways as Morrison appeared in the doorway. His shot scorched past her ear. Before he could fire again, Callum's rifle spoke. Morrison spun and fell, his good arm now matching his injured one. Sudden silence descended, broken only by Morrison's moaning and the ringing in Eleanor's ears. That all of them? She gasped. 4 down. Callum scanned the windows. Stay alert. They waited. Weapons ready, but no more attacks came. Finally, Callum moved carefully to check the fallen men. 2 dead, 2 wounded but alive. Morrison glared up at them with pure hatred. You'll hang for this. Briggs, both of you, killing lawmen. Lawmen who attacked without warrant or warning? Eleanor found her voice surprisingly steady. Who tried to murder a widow in cold blood? I think a jury might see it differently. She turned away from his cursing to find Callum leaning heavily against the wall. His shirt was soaked with blood now, face gray with pain. How bad? She asked. Bad enough. He managed a weak smile. But worth it to see you shoot. Natural-born fighter, just like I thought. Eleanor helped him to a chair, hands gentle but efficient as she examined the reopened wound. The violence of minutes ago seemed distant now, replaced by a different kind of intensity as she worked to save the man who'd saved her. Why? She asked as she cleaned the wound. Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Because I've been dead inside for years, he admitted, voice rough with pain. Watching you was like seeing color after living in gray. When I saw what your husband was planning, what would happen to you. He caught her hand. I couldn't let you disappear too. Eleanor stared at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred, hers still bearing the indent of her wedding ring. Outside, Morrison had stopped cursing, probably passed out. The sun slanted lower, painting the ruined room in shades of gold and red. What happens now? She whispered. Now? Callum squeezed her hand gently. Now we survive. Get to the next town. Send word to the territorial marshal about what really happened. Clear our names if we can. Disappear if we can't. together. That's up to you, Eleanor. I've got nothing to offer but a life on the run and a reputation that'll follow us like a shadow. Eleanor thought of her empty house in Dustwater, of in-laws who saw her as property, of a life built on lies and propriety. Then she looked at this man who'd seen her truly, who'd risked everything to tell her the truth, who'd taught her to shoot with her left hand because he'd noticed what no one else had. "I told you," she said firmly. "I made my choice." Something shifted in Callum's storm-cloud eyes, a warmth breaking through the perpetual wariness. He lifted her hand to his lips, the gesture oddly courtly despite their savage surroundings. "Then we'd better get moving," he said. "Long road ahead." Eleanor helped him stand, both of them battered but unbroken. As they prepared to leave the bullet-scarred shelter, she realized the woman who'd entered this place no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, truer, more alive than she'd ever been. The transformation was complete. The banker's widow had died in that shootout, and Eleanor, just Eleanor now, was ready for whatever came next. They rode through the afternoon heat. Callum slumped forward in the saddle while Eleanor sat behind him, one arm around his waist to keep him steady, the other holding the reins he'd reluctantly surrendered. The horse picked its way down the mountain trail, and Eleanor marveled at how quickly she'd adapted to this new reality, blood on her hands, a gun at her hip, and the strange intimacy of keeping a wounded man upright. "There's a trading post," Callum said, his voice rough. "About 10 miles. Man named Elijah runs it. He won't ask questions." "Can you make it 10 miles? "Have to." But she felt him slipping, his weight growing heavier against her. The bandages were soaked through again, and she knew they were racing against time. The sun beat down mercilessly, and her own throat was parched. But she didn't dare stop. As they descended into a valley dotted with juniper and sage, Eleanor spotted riders in the distance, not pursuing, just traveling. Her hand went instinctively to the pistol. "Easy," Callum murmured. "Just travelers. Not everyone's hunting us. How can you tell? Way they ride, relaxed. Men on the hunt ride different, tense, watching everything." He coughed, and she felt him shudder. "Like we are." They gave the riders a wide berth anyway, Eleanor learning to guide the horse through rougher terrain to avoid the main trail. By the time they reached the trading post, the sun was low on the horizon, and Callum was barely conscious. The post squatted like a toad beside a muddy stream, log walls chinked with clay, smoke rising from a stone chimney. As Eleanor helped Callum dismount, a massive man emerged, part Mexican, part something else, with arms like tree trunks and eyes that missed nothing. "Elijah," Callum managed. "Need help." The big man's gaze traveled from Callum's blood-soaked shirt to Eleanor's torn morning dress, to the guns they both carried. "Inside, quickly." The interior was dim and cluttered, smelling of tobacco, leather, and herbs. Elijah helped carry Callum to a back room where a narrow bed waited. "Maria," he called, and a woman appeared, small, silver-haired, with hands that spoke of decades of healing work. She took one look at Callum and began issuing rapid orders in Spanish. "You are the banker's widow," Elijah said to Eleanor. It wasn't a question. "I was." She met his gaze steadily. "Now I'm just Eleanor." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "There is water in the barrel, food in the pot. You look like you need both." While Maria worked on Callum, Eleanor found herself alone in the main room. She drank deeply, splashed water on her face, and caught sight of herself in a cracked mirror. The woman staring back was unrecognizable, hair wild, face sunburned, dress so torn it barely preserved modesty. But the eyes held a clarity they'd never possessed in all her years of proper widowhood. She found scissors and began cutting away the ruined parts of her dress, fashioning it into something more practical. The corset went next, thrown into the fire with a satisfaction that surprised her. She breathed deeply for what felt like the first time in years. "He will live," Maria announced, returning with bloody rags. "The wound is clean now, but he must rest. Thank you." Eleanor felt the tension drain from her shoulders. What do I owe you? Callum saved our son from hanging once. Elijah said simply, we owe him more than one life. As night fell, Eleanor found herself keeping vigil by Callum's bedside. His fever had broken, and he slept deeply. In the lamplight, she studied his face, the sharp angles softened by sleep, the perpetual wariness gone. He looked younger, almost vulnerable. She thought about touching him, smoothing back the dark hair from his forehead, but held back. Too much had happened too fast. Yesterday she'd been burying her husband. Today she'd killed for this man. The speed of change left her dizzy. Can't sleep? She startled. His eyes were open, watching her. I thought you were... How do you feel? Like I've been shot and sewn back together. He tried to sit up, winced, and settled back. Which I suppose I have. You should rest. So should you. When's the last time you slept? Eleanor couldn't remember. The world before the cemetery seemed distant as a dream. I'll sleep when we're safe, she said. Then you'll never sleep again. His hand found hers. There's no such thing as safe in this life. Eleanor, just different degrees of danger. Is that supposed to be comforting? It's supposed to be honest. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You could still go back, tell them I kidnapped you, forced you at gunpoint. They might believe it. After I shot 2 men defending you, she squeezed his hand. I think we're past pretty lies. Callum? He was quiet for a moment. Why did you do it? Really? Eleanor considered the question. Because when that man pointed his gun at you, the thought of losing you was unbearable. Which makes no sense. I barely know you. You know me better than most. His voice dropped lower. And I know you. Watched you for 6 months, remember? Saw how you counted the steps from the door to your carriage. Same number every time. Saw how you touched that locket when you were nervous. Your mother's? Grandmother's? Eleanor was startled by his perception. Saw how you looked at the horizon sometimes, like you were calculating the distance to freedom. He shifted carefully to face her better. Saw how you died a little more each day in that house. And you thought to save me? There was an edge to her voice now. The outlaw rescuing the trapped princess. No. His answer was firm. I thought to show you the door. You're the one who walked through it. You saved yourself. Eleanor, I just gave you a reason to try. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She had chosen this. Every step, every decision, had been hers, even now. Sitting beside a wounded outlaw in a trading post that smelled of blood and herbs, she was exactly where she'd chosen to be. I need some air, she said abruptly. Outside, the desert night wrapped around her like a blanket. Stars blazed overhead, more than she'd ever seen from town. The vastness of it all made her feel small and infinite at once. Beautiful, no? Maria had joined her, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. I've never seen so many stars. Eleanor admitted. The town, it hides them. Too much light, too much smoke. Maria studied her with knowing eyes. You love him. I buried my husband yesterday. And did you love your husband? Eleanor's automatic yes died on her lips. No, I don't think I did. Then yesterday you buried a stranger. Today you sit beside a man you would kill for. Maria shrugged. The heart knows its own timing. It's not that simple. Love is the simplest thing in the world. Child, it's everything else that makes it complicated. They stood in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Finally, Maria spoke again. There is an old mission, San Salvador, 3 days south, abandoned now, but the well still runs clear. If you need a place to rest, to decide your path. Thank you, Eleanor said, understanding the gift being offered. Sanctuary, time, a chance to breathe. When she returned inside, Callum was awake, trying to sit up despite obvious pain. What are you doing? Heard voices, wanted to make sure that I hadn't run off or that trouble hadn't found us. She pressed him back down gently. Either way, I'm fine. We're fine. For now. But he relaxed under her touch. Elijah says there's been no word from Dustwater yet, but it'll come. Morrison survived. He'll make sure everyone knows his version. Then we'll tell ours. Eleanor. His voice carried a weight of experience. You need to understand something. The truth doesn't matter as much as who tells it. Morrison's a deputy. His cousin's a territorial judge. You're a woman who ran off with your husband's killer. Which story do you think they'll believe? The injustice of it burned, but she knew he was right. So we run, or we fight. But that means more killing, more running anyway. That's the life you're choosing. Always looking over your shoulder, never settling anywhere long, trusting no one but each other. You're trying to scare me away again. I'm trying to make sure you understand, because once we leave here together, there's no going back. You'll be mine in their eyes. My woman, my accomplice, my responsibility. Every bad thing I've ever done will be yours too. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks at my woman, but she held his gaze. And everything I've done will be yours, including the money. He blinked. What money? The accounts Samuel was hiding. I know where they are, not just the ledgers, but the actual accounts, bearer bonds, gold certificates, things that don't need names. She smiled at his expression. You didn't think I spent 5 years married to a banker without learning something, did you? How much? Enough to disappear. Enough to start over somewhere they'll never find us. Maybe California, or even Mexico. That's blood money. Yes, but it was stolen from good people who'll never see it again anyway. At least this way. Something good comes from it. Callum was quiet for a long time, and Eleanor wondered if she'd misjudged, if his code of honor wouldn't allow it. Then he laughed, short and bitter. Samuel Whitmore's money funding his killer's escape with his widow? There's a certain justice to it. Then we'll do it. We'll need to be smart. Can't just walk into a bank. I know which ones won't ask questions. Samuel made sure of that. She felt the plan crystallizing, the banker's widow's knowledge merging with the outlaw's instincts. 3 days to San Salvador, you said. You'll be healed enough to ride by then. I'll have to be. Dawn was breaking when Eleanor finally let exhaustion claim her. She woke to find herself in the bed beside Callum, fully clothed but pressed against his uninjured side, his arm around her. She should have been scandalized. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. Sorry, she mumbled, starting to pull away. His arm tightened. Don't, please. So she stayed, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the rise and fall of his breathing. Outside, she could hear Elijah preparing for the day's business, Maria singing softly in Spanish. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives, a world she'd stepped outside of forever. Eleanor, Callum said softly, that night at the bank, I wasn't there for evidence. She stilled. No? I was there for travel money, planning to leave town, get away from the temptation. What temptation? You. The word hung between them like a confession. Every day watching you was torture. Wanting what I couldn't have, seeing you fade away and not being able to stop it. I was going to run before I did something stupid. Like save my life? Like ruin it. His voice was raw. Look at you now. Hunted, homeless, turned into a killer. Is that better than what you had? Eleanor rose up on one elbow to look at him. Yes, because what I had was death. Just slower. This, she gestured to encompass everything. The dingy room, their wounds, their uncertain future. This is life. Dangerous and uncertain and probably short. But real. Mine. She leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't the desperate passion of their first night or the gentle gratitude of rescue. This was deliberate, a claiming. He responded after a moment's surprise, his hand tangling in her hair, pulling her closer despite his injuries. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor saw something new in his storm cloud eyes. Hope, perhaps, or just recognition that they'd crossed another line. 3 days to San Salvador, she said. 3 days, he agreed. They would heal, they would plan, and they would disappear into the vast American wilderness with stolen money and clean consciences. The banker's widow and the gunslinger, writing their own story in blood and dust and desire. Outside, the sun climbed higher, indifferent to human struggles. Inside, two people who'd found each other at the worst possible moment, prepared to gamble everything on the chance that it might also be the best. The mission of San Salvador crumbled against the desert sky like a broken promise. Its bell tower had partially collapsed, and sand drifted through empty doorways where faithful had once gathered. But the walls still stood strong, and as Maria had promised, the well ran clear and cold. Eleanor tended Callum in what had once been the priest's quarters, a small room with thick adobe walls that kept the worst of the heat at bay. For 3 days now, she'd watched him battle fever and infection, his body fighting to heal from wounds that went deeper than flesh. "Water," he mumbled, lost in another fevered dream. She pressed a damp cloth to his burning forehead, then helped him sip from the cup. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, before sliding shut again. In his delirium, he called out names: Matthew, his brother; Rosa, someone who made him weep; names of men he'd killed or failed to save. Eleanor had never felt more helpless. She knew how to host dinner parties and manage household accounts, not how to heal a man dying by degrees. But she did what she could, keeping the wounds clean, forcing water and thin broth between his lips, talking to him when the nightmares grew too violent. On the 4th night, she found Samuel's journal in the saddlebags where she'd hidden it before leaving Dustwater, by lamplight. She read her late husband's meticulous records of his crimes. The entries were businesslike, recording bribes and land thefts with the same detachment he'd used for legitimate banking. But near the end, the tone changed. C.B. grows suspicious. May need permanent solution. So, wife noticed bruises. Must be more careful. Sometimes wonder if father was right, if I lack the stomach for true power. Eleanor closed the journal, feeling sick. She'd lived with this man for 5 years, shared his bed, borne his casual cruelties, and never truly known him at all. Or perhaps she had known, deep down, and simply chosen the comfort of ignorance. Reading the good book. She startled. Callum was awake, truly awake, his eyes clear for the first time in days. "You're back," she breathed, touching his face. The fever had broken. "Never left, just took a detour through hell." He caught her hand. "How long?" "4 days. I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought I was going to lose you. Take more than a bullet to kill me, Eleanor." But his bravado was thin. They both knew how close it had been. She helped him sit up, noting with relief that the wounds had finally begun to close properly. As he sipped water, she showed him Samuel's journal. "He was planning to have you killed." Callum read the entry, unsurprised. "I figured as much. Man like that doesn't tolerate loose ends." "There's more." Eleanor flipped to earlier pages. The accounts he was hiding. There's nearly $50,000 spread across 3 banks, plus gold certificates hidden in a safety deposit box in Santa Fe. Callum whistled low. "That's more than blood money. That's an ocean of blood. Blood already spilled. We can't bring those people back, but we can use their loss to build something better." "We?" He set down the journal, studying her. "Eleanor, what are we doing here?" "Surviving." "No, I mean—" He gestured between them. Us. You're a lady, educated, refined. I'm a killer who can barely read. When the danger's past, when you've had time to think—" Eleanor slapped him. The crack echoed off the adobe walls. Callum touched his cheek, startled. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare tell me what I am or what I should want. I've had a lifetime of men deciding my worth, my place, my future. You're the only one who ever looked at me and saw something more than a banker's pretty wife. Eleanor, I've killed for you. I've nursed you through fever. I've chosen you over everything I've ever known. And still you doubt?" He caught her hand before she could strike again. "I don't doubt you. I doubt me. I doubt whether I'm worth what you're sacrificing. That's my choice to make." "Is it?" His grip tightened. Because once we take that money, once we run together, you're tied to me forever. My past, my enemies, my darkness, all of it becomes yours. And I've got so much darkness. Eleanor, more than you know. Then tell me." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old ghosts. "I was married once, Rosa. Met her in Juarez when I was running from the Rangers. Sweet girl. Innocent. Thought I could change for her, be the man she deserved." His eyes went distant. "Year later, men I'd wronged found us. They made me watch while they—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "After, I hunted them down. All 7. Took my time with it. The things I did, Rosa wouldn't have recognized the man I became." Eleanor absorbed this, understanding the shape of his guilt. "You avenged her. I became a monster for her. That's not the same thing." He released her hand. "That darkness is still in me. Eleanor, sometimes I feel it crawling under my skin. Waiting. What happens when you see it?" "I've already seen it." She thought of the logging camp, the efficient violence, the satisfaction in his eyes when Morrison fell. "I saw it and I stayed." That was survival. What about when it's not? What about when someone just looks at you wrong in a saloon? Or cheats at cards? Or— Eleanor kissed him, cutting off his spiral of self-doubt. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide. "I'm not Rosa," she said firmly. "I'm not innocent, and I don't need you to be good. I need you to be real, to be mine." Something shifted in his expression, walls crumbling like the mission around them. "Eleanor, no more talking." She began unbuttoning his shirt, careful of his bandages. "You've been dying for 4 days. I've been alone with my thoughts and Samuel's journal and the ghost of every proper thing I'm supposed to want. And all I could think about was bringing you back." His hands came up to frame her face. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." This time when they came together, it was different from the desperate heat of the logging camp. This was deliberate, sacred almost, a claiming of each other among the ruins. Eleanor mapped his scars with her lips while he whispered her name like a prayer. They moved carefully around his injuries, finding ways to express what words couldn't capture. After, they lay entwined on the narrow bed, desert moonlight painting silver patterns through the broken roof. Eleanor traced the newest scar on his ribs, already planning their future. "There's a bank in Las Cruces," she said. "One of Samuel's. The manager won't ask questions if I have the right documents." "When did you become a criminal mastermind?" "Somewhere between shooting my first man and falling in love with an outlaw." He stilled. "Love?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Love? Problem with that?" "No." His voice roughened. "No problem. Just never thought I'd hear that word again. Never thought I'd say it. But nothing." He pulled her closer. "I love you too. Eleanor, God help us both." They spent the next day planning. Eleanor had memorized Samuel's account numbers, knew which banks held what assets. Callum knew the territory, the safe routes, where they could disappear. Together, they crafted an escape that might actually work. After Las Cruces, we head west. Callum traced the route on the ground with a stick. Arizona territory still wild enough to lose ourselves. Maybe California eventually. Or Mexico, Eleanor suggested. "Your Spanish is good." "You want to leave the country? I want to go where Eleanor Whitmore never existed, where we can be whoever we choose." That night, Eleanor burned Samuel's journal, watching 5 years of crimes turn to ash. She kept only the pages with account information, tucked into a hidden pocket she'd sewn into her modified dress. "Tomorrow," Callum said, watching the fire. "You ready?" "I've been ready since the night you crashed through my window." He smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Technically, we went through the window together. Semantics." But she smiled too, feeling the last chains of her old life crumble like burnt paper. On their final morning at San Salvador, Eleanor stood in what had been the chapel. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, illuminating faded murals of saints and angels. She wasn't religious, But something about the space invited reflection. Making peace with God? Callum asked from the doorway. Making peace with myself. She turned to him. Do you regret it? Saving me? Never. He joined her among the ruins. Do you regret being saved? I regret that it took Samuel dying for me to start living. She touched a painted angel, its face worn smooth by wind and time. But no, I don't regret choosing you. They loaded their supplies, food and water from the trading post, ammunition, the few belongings they'd accumulated. Eleanor had traded her ruined mourning dress for practical riding clothes. The transformation was complete. Nothing of the banker's widow remained. As they mounted up, Eleanor took one last look at the mission. It had sheltered them through crisis, given them time to heal and choose. Now it would return to its slow decay, keeping their secrets among its stones. Ready? Callum asked. Eleanor settled behind him on the horse, arms around his waist. The position was familiar now, comfortable. Let's go rob a bank. He laughed, the sound rich and free. That's my girl. They rode south through the morning shadows, toward Las Cruces, and the fortune that would buy their freedom. Eleanor felt no guilt about taking the money. Those debts were owed to people Samuel had destroyed, and they were beyond recompense. Better to use it building something new than let it rot in ledgers. What will we do? She asked as they traveled. When we're safe. Ranch, maybe, somewhere with good grass and water. Raise horses. He glanced back. That sound all right? That sounds perfect. She could see it, a small spread somewhere remote. Just the two of them and the sky. Maybe children eventually. Wild creatures who'd never know the cages that had trapped their parents. Could teach you to break horses, he offered. You've got the hands for it. These hands. She held one up, still showing traces of banker's ink and parlor softness. Those hands shot 2 men and saved my life. They'll do fine. The sun climbed higher as they descended from the hills. Behind them lay dust, water, and death, and every proper thing Eleanor had been raised to want. Ahead lay uncertainty and danger, and a love that had no place in civilized society. She pressed closer to Callum, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. Whatever came next, the bank in Las Cruces, the flight across territories, the new life they'd build from stolen gold and shared darkness. She was ready. The banker's widow was dead. Had been since that night she'd climbed through a window with a gunslinger. In her place rode Eleanor, just Eleanor, choosing love over law, freedom over safety, truth over the pretty lies that had nearly killed her. The desert stretched endlessly before them, full of promise and peril. Eleanor smiled into the wind and held on tight, ready for whatever rough magic the frontier had to offer. The abandoned silver mine carved into the mountainside like a wound that wouldn't heal. Eleanor and Callum had tracked the deputy sheriff, William Thornton, for 3 days, following whispers and rumors through mining camps and frontier towns. The man who'd orchestrated the attack on Eleanor's home, who'd corrupted the law Samuel had already bent, had made this desolate place his fortress. 20 men, maybe more. Callum observed from their vantage point among the rocks. Well armed, they've turned this into a proper hideout. Eleanor studied the scene below through field glasses they'd acquired in Las Cruces, along with fresh horses and supplies. The successful bank withdrawal had gone smoothly, her knowledge of Samuel's accounts and forged signatures opening doors that should have been barred. $40,000 in bearer bonds now rested in hidden pockets throughout their gear. There! She pointed to a figure emerging from the mine entrance. Thornton! The deputy had shed any pretense of law enforcement. He wore expensive clothes, silver conchos on his gun belt, the costume of a man who'd found more profit in crime than justice. Eleanor felt her jaw tighten, remembering his voice outside her home that night, promising safety while planning murder. We could leave, Callum said quietly. Take the money and disappear. Let him rot in his stolen kingdom. Could we? Eleanor lowered the glasses, always wondering when he'll find us. When one of his men will recognize us in some cantina. No, this ends here. It's suicide. Eleanor, 2 against 20. Then we don't fight like them. She smiled grimly. We fight like us. That evening, Eleanor transformed herself, using materials from a traveling theater troupe they'd encountered. She became what men like Thornton expected, a saloon girl, pretty and available, harmless as a butterfly. The disguise chafed against everything she'd become, but that was its power. I don't like this, Callum said, watching her apply rouge with a practiced hand that belied her background. You don't have to like it. You just have to trust me. She adjusted the low-cut dress, hiding a small pistol in the folds. Create the distraction at midnight. I'll handle the rest. Eleanor, she kissed him, tasting his fear. I'm not the banker's widow anymore, remember? I'm the woman who chose to ride with you. The ride to the mine felt eternal. Eleanor played her part as she approached the sentries, giggling and stumbling like she'd had too much whiskey. The men leered and joked, passing her through with casual pats and pinches that made her skin crawl. Inside the mine, lanterns cast dancing shadows on rough walls. Men clustered around card tables and whiskey barrels, the air thick with smoke and unwashed bodies. Eleanor forced herself to smile, to sway her hips, to become invisible in her visibility. Well now, Thornton's voice oiled across the space. What have we here? She turned, letting recognition flicker across her face before hiding it. Too late, he'd seen. Boys, he said slowly, I believe we've got ourselves a special guest, Mrs. Samuel Whitmore herself, come to pay her respects. The room went still. Eleanor dropped the act, straightening with a dignity that had never truly left her. Deputy Thornton, though I suppose that title's meaningless now. Everything's meaningless out here, darling. That's what makes it beautiful. He stood, hand resting on his gun. Where's Briggs? Dead. Fever took him 3 days ago. The lie came easily. I've been running alone. Pity. Would have enjoyed killing him myself. Thornton circled her like a wolf. Question is, what do we do with you? I have a proposition. He laughed. You've got nothing I want. Widow. I have $40,000 in bearer bonds that say otherwise. The room's attention sharpened. Greed was a universal language among thieves. Samuel's hidden accounts. She continued. I know you were part of it, skimming your percentage while he and Judge Patterson ran the show. But did you know about the emergency funds, the ones he kept completely off the books? Thornton's eyes glittered. Keep talking. It's hidden nearby. I'll take you to it. But I want guarantees. Safe passage out of the territory. A cut for myself. Or I could just make you tell me. Eleanor smiled coldly. You could try. But I spent 5 years with Samuel Whitmore. I know exactly how much pain a person can endure before breaking. Do you really have that kind of time? Before Thornton could respond, an explosion rocked the mine. Dust rained from the ceiling as men shouted and scrambled. The midnight distraction. Callum had been busy with the dynamite they'd acquired. In the chaos, Eleanor moved. The hidden pistol appeared in her hand, and Thornton's gun flew from his holster before he could draw. She'd practiced this moment, visualized it through long hours of riding. Nobody move! Her voice cut through the confusion. Another explosion, closer this time. Men ran for the entrance, only to find it collapsing in a controlled demolition. Callum knew his business. You clever witch! Thornton snarled. Samuel underestimated me too. She kept the gun steady. It's a common failing among men who confuse quiet with weak. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Callum had found his positions, turning the mine into a shooting gallery. Men dove for cover, firing blind into the darkness. Eleanor used the chaos to move deeper into the mine, forcing Thornton ahead of her. The money's real, she said conversationally as they walked. Hidden in the old mission at San Salvador, but you'll never see it. You're insane. You'll die in here with the rest of us. Maybe, but justice is worth that risk. They reached a junction where mining equipment lay abandoned. In the flickering lantern light, Eleanor saw what she'd hoped. Blasting supplies. Forgotten when the silver ran out. Far enough, she said. Thornton turned. his face ugly with rage. "You think you've won. Even if you kill me, there'll be others. The whole system. We'll continue without you, but at least you won't be part of it." Eleanor heard Callum's signal. 3 sharp whistles. Time to go. "Last words?" she asked. "You're no better than us. You killed too. You stole too." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "But I killed killers and stole from thieves. That has to count for something." She shot him twice. Center mass. He crumpled. Surprise replacing rage. Eleanor felt nothing. No satisfaction. No regret. Just the cold necessity of ending a threat. The mine was chaos when she emerged. Callum had positioned himself brilliantly, using the terrain to make one man seem like 5. Bodies littered the ground, and the survivors had fled into the desert night. "Time to go," he called, appearing from the shadows. They ran together as Eleanor's prepared charges detonated behind them. She'd learned about blasting from Samuel's mining investments. Theoretical knowledge made practical. The explosions walked up the mountain like giant footsteps, and with a grinding roar, the mine entrance collapsed entirely. They made it to the horses as the dust cloud bloomed against the stars. Eleanor looked back once at the tomb she'd created, then mounted up without a word. They rode hard through the night, not stopping until dawn painted the mountains pink and gold. At a clear stream, they finally paused to water the horses and themselves. "It's done," Eleanor said simply. "How many?" "I don't know. Enough." She met his eyes. "Are you angry?" "Angry?" Callum pulled her against him. "I'm terrified, impressed, maybe a little aroused." He kissed her forehead. "But not angry. They got what they deserved. I've become like them. Like you said. A killer. No." His voice was firm. "You've become someone who protects herself, who finishes what others started. That's not the same thing." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she could still feel the gun bucking in her hand. See Thornton's face as he fell. "Will it always feel like this?" "Like what?" "Empty. I thought I'd feel something. Triumph, maybe, or guilt, but there's just nothing. That's your soul protecting itself. The feelings will come later, when you're safe enough to have them." He tipped her chin up. "And when they do, I'll be there." They reached a border town 2 days later, dusty and exhausted, but alive. At a telegraph office, Eleanor sent coded messages to certain accounts, moving money through channels Samuel had taught her. By the time anyone untangled the transfers, she and Callum would be ghosts. "Mexico?" she asked as they stood at the literal crossroads. "Mexico." He agreed. They crossed the Rio Grande at sunset, the water running red in the dying light. On the other side, Eleanor felt something shift, like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. Eleanor Whitmore was truly dead now, along with the men who'd tried to kill her. "What do I call you now?" Callum asked as they made camp on the Mexican side. "Can't keep calling you Eleanor if we're trying to disappear." She considered. "Maria," she decided. "It's common enough. And you?" "John. Every third man's named John. Maria and John." She tried the names out. Simple people living simple lives, with $40,000 in bearer bonds. 30,000. "I sent 10 to the families Samuel cheated, the ones I could find records for." Callum stared at her. "You gave away $10,000? Blood money needs cleaning. This is how we clean it." She unpacked their bedrolls. "Besides, 30,000's more than enough for that ranch you mentioned." That night, they made love under foreign stars, christening their new identities. Maria and John, born from violence but reaching toward peace. Maria, traced the scars on John's chest, memorizing this new life by touch. "No regrets?" he asked in the darkness. "None. You?" "Just one." "What's that?" "That it took so much death to bring us together." Maria considered this. Maybe that's the only way people like us could find each other. Through fire. Then thank God for the burning. They traveled deeper into Mexico as autumn came on, following rivers and valleys toward a future they'd build with their own hands. Word filtered down about the mine collapse, about the deputy and his gang buried under tons of rock. The story grew in the telling until it became legend. The banker's widow who'd turned avenger, who'd brought biblical justice to the desert. But Maria and John knew nothing of legends. They were simple ranchers, shopping for horses in Chihuahua, planning irrigation systems, learning the rhythms of a new land. If Maria sometimes woke gasping from dreams of gunfire, John held her until the shaking stopped. If John sometimes went cold and distant, remembering other deaths in other places, Maria waited patiently for him to return. They found their ranch in a valley where cottonwoods grew along a clear stream. The previous owner, an old vaquero, sold it cheap to the young couple who paid in cash and asked no questions. 40 acres of good grass, a solid adobe house, corrals that just needed mending. Home? John asked, watching Maria survey their kingdom. Home. She agreed. As winter approached, they settled into rhythms as old as the land itself, mending fences, breaking horses, building a life from sunrise to sunset. Sometimes Maria missed the ease of her old life, the servants, the silk dresses, the social rounds. But then she'd watch John working with a young horse, patient and gentle despite his capacity for violence, and know she'd traded up beyond measure. The past found them only once. A drifter came through looking for water, and his eyes lingered too long on Maria's face. She saw recognition flicker and quickly die as John stepped out of the barn, hand casual on his gun. "Much obliged for the water," the man said quickly, mounting up. "You're welcome to it," John replied easily. "Safe travels." They watched him ride away, then looked at each other. "He knew," Maria said. "Maybe, doesn't matter. He also knew better than to care." That night, Maria burned the last evidence of Eleanor Whitmore. The account ledgers, the forged documents, even the wedding ring she'd kept hidden. The metal melted into a formless lump that John hurled into the stream. "It's finished," she said, watching the last papers curl to ash. "No," John corrected, pulling her close. "It's just beginning." And in that Mexican valley, far from the justice and judgment of their former world, Maria and John began to build something worth having. Not redemption, that was too grand a word for what they'd done. Just a life, simple and honest, paid for in blood but grown in love. The banker's widow was gone. The gunslinger vanished. In their place stood two people who'd chosen each other over everything the world said they should want. And that, Eleanor knew in her bones, was worth any price they'd paid to get there. The church bells of Dustwater rang hollow in the autumn air as Eleanor Whitmore stood before the congregation, her traveling dress still dusty from the long journey back. 6 months had passed since she'd fled through her parlor window with Callum Briggs. 6 months of running, fighting, becoming someone she barely recognized. Now she stood in the house of God, ready to speak truth to a town built on lies. "You all know me," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed sanctuary. "Or you think you do, the banker's widow, the woman who ran off with her husband's killer." Murmurs rippled through the pews. She saw familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson clutching her hymnal, Judge Patterson in the front row with his wife, her in-laws sitting rigid with shock at her return. Sheriff Morrison was notably absent, still recovering from his wounds. "I've come back to tell you the truth about Samuel Whitmore. About your banks, your land deeds, your town." She pulled out the leather journal she'd kept hidden. "It's all here, every bribe, every stolen acre, every family destroyed so men like my husband could build their fortunes." "This is hardly the place." Judge Patterson started to rise. "Sit down, Judge." Callum's voice came from the back of the church. He stood by the doors, coat pushed back to show his guns. "Let the lady speak." Eleanor had argued against his coming, but he'd refused to let her face this alone. They'd ridden back across the border with evidence that could destroy half the town's power structure, knowing it might cost them everything. "Samuel kept meticulous records," Eleanor continued, opening the journal. "Judge Patterson, you received $5,000 to rule against the Hernandez family's land claim. Their ranch now belongs to Mayor Whitfield's son." She read on, each entry a hammer blow against the town's respectable facade. Forged deeds, murdered homesteaders. banks foreclosing on loans that had been secretly paid. The congregation sat frozen. Some in shock, others in growing anger. "You're lying!" Margaret Whitmore stood, her face twisted with rage. "My son was a pillar of this community. Your son was a thief and a murderer." Eleanor met her mother-in-law's glare steadily. "And you knew it. That's why you tried to take control of the estate, to hide the evidence, even if this is true." Thomas Whitmore said, his lawyer's mind working. "You're confessing to theft. That money you took belonged to the people Samuel stole from. I've returned what I could to the survivors. The rest," she smiled coldly, "consider it compensation for attempted murder." "You have no proof of that," Judge Patterson said, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "Deputy Thornton's men talked plenty before the mine collapsed." The lie came smoothly. Amazing what people will confess when they think they're dying. The church erupted. Some shouted accusations at their neighbors. Others defended themselves. A few tried to leave only to find Callum blocking the exit. Through it all, Eleanor stood calm in the storm she'd created. "Enough!" A new voice cut through the chaos. Federal Marshal James McKenna strode down the aisle, 2 deputies flanking him. Eleanor had sent him copies of Samuel's records weeks ago, hoping federal authority might succeed where local law had failed. "Judge Patterson, Mayor Whitfield, you'll need to come with us." The marshal's tone brooked no argument. "We have questions about your financial dealings." "This is outrageous," Patterson blustered. "You can't believe the ravings of a fallen woman and her outlaw lover." "No, but I can believe bank records, forged signatures, and 3 witnesses who've agreed to testify in exchange for leniency." McKenna nodded to Eleanor. "Your information was most helpful, Mrs. Whitmore." As the deputies began making arrests, Eleanor felt Callum's hand on her elbow. "Time to go," he murmured. But she had one more thing to do. She walked to where her in-laws sat, pale and shaken. "The house, the bank shares, they're yours," she told them. "I don't want anything with the Whitmore name on it, but know this, if you come after us again, what happened to Thornton will seem merciful." Margaret's mouth worked soundlessly. Thomas just nodded, understanding the threat for what it was. Outside, Eleanor breathed deep of the crisp air. Half the town had spilled onto the street, watching as their leaders were loaded into prison wagons. Some looked at her with hatred, others with something like gratitude. "You did it," Callum said quietly. "We did it." She took his arm, noticing how no one dared approach them. The banker's widow and the gunslinger. They'd become legend without meaning to. They were mounting their horses when a small figure darted from the crowd. Maria Hernandez, whose family's ranch had been stolen, pressed a small wooden cross into Eleanor's hand. "For protection," the girl whispered. "And thank you." Eleanor's throat tightened. This was why they'd risked coming back, not for revenge, but for justice, for families like the Hernandez clan who'd lost everything to greedy men. They rode out of Dustwater as the sun reached its zenith, taking nothing but what they'd brought. Behind them, the town convulsed with change. Old power structures crumbling as new voices demanded to be heard. "Any regrets?" Callum asked as they climbed into the hills. "None." Eleanor tucked the wooden cross into her pocket. "You?" "Just wondering what name to use next. John's getting a bit stale." She laughed, the sound carrying across the desert. "How about your real name? Callum and Eleanor, starting fresh. Those people are wanted in 3 territories. Then we'll go where they're not wanted. California, maybe? I hear San Francisco's building so fast they don't ask questions." They camped that night by a stream where cottonwoods grew thick, as Eleanor tended their small fire. She thought about transformation. 6 months ago, she'd been trapped in a life that was killing her slowly. Now she was free, changed, partnered with a man who saw her truly. "I need to tell you something," Callum said suddenly. She looked up from the fire, alerted by his serious tone. "What is it?" "That federal marshal, McKenna, I knew him before, when I rode with the Rangers." He stared into the flames. "He recognized me, I'm sure of it, But he didn't say anything. Why not? Maybe because he knew Samuel Whitmore, too, knew what kind of man he was. Callum met her eyes. Or maybe because he saw us together and figured some justice is worth more than the law. Eleanor moved to sit beside him, their shoulders touching. Are you worried he'll come after us? No, McKenna's straight, but he's not rigid. Long as we stay out of federal business, he'll let sleeping dogs lie. He put his arm around her. Besides, after what you pulled in that church, I think half the territory's afraid of you. Good. She leaned into his warmth. Fear's useful sometimes. They were quiet for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Then Eleanor spoke again. I want to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Always. If you could go back to before Samuel died, before any of this, would you change it? Callum was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you mean, would I trade all the blood and running for a chance to court you proper? Take you to church socials and bring you flowers? Something like that. No. His answer was firm. Because that man, the one who'd court the banker's wife properly, he wouldn't be me, and the woman who'd accept those flowers wouldn't be you. We are who we are because of the fire we walked through. Even though I've become, she searched for words, hard, dangerous. You were always dangerous. The fire just revealed it. He tilted her chin up. I fell in love with a woman who shot 2 men to save my life, who faced down a town full of corruption with nothing but truth and courage. That's worth more than all the flowers in the world. Eleanor kissed him then, pouring all her complex feelings into the connection. When they broke apart, she made a decision. There's something else in Samuel's records, something I didn't tell the marshal. Callum raised an eyebrow, waiting. A bank in San Francisco, completely separate from the others, set up under a false name. There's nearly $100,000 there. He whistled low. That's a fortune. It's our future, if we want it. Enough to buy respectability. Even in California. New names, new life. Maybe even that ranch you talked about. Built on blood money. Everything's built on blood money, if you look close enough. At least we'd use it well. Callum considered this, his moral code warring with pragmatism. Finally, he nodded. One condition. Name it. We use part of it to help people like the Hernandez family. Set up a fund, anonymous-like, for folks who got cheated but can't prove it. Eleanor smiled. I love you. That's not an answer? Yes, it is. They broke camp before dawn, riding west toward California and whatever future they could build. The sun rose behind them, casting long shadows ahead. Eleanor thought about shadows, how they could hide you or reveal you, depending on the light. In a town called Riverside, they stopped to resupply. The general store owner barely glanced at them, too busy with a steady stream of settlers heading further west. Eleanor bought practical clothes, ammunition, and, on impulse, a small silver ring from a display case. What's that for? Callum asked. Insurance. She slipped it onto her left hand. Maria and John were married, remember? Callum and Eleanor should be too. That's not exactly a proper proposal. Nothing about us is proper. She admired how the simple band caught the light. But it's honest. That night in a boarding house, they made love with the windows open to catch the evening breeze. Eleanor traced new scars on Callum's body, souvenirs from their months of running, while he mapped the ways she'd changed. Muscle where softness used to be, calluses from gun and rain, a hardness in her eyes that matched his own. Sometimes I miss her, Eleanor admitted in the darkness. The woman I used to be. She was innocent. She was dying. Callum corrected gently. Slowly, but surely. That's not innocence. That's surrender. And now? Now you're alive. Scarred and complicated and maybe a little wild. But alive. Wild. She tested the word. I like that. 3 weeks later, they reached San Francisco. The city sprawled in glorious chaos. Buildings rising from mud streets. Fortunes being made and lost daily. Perfect cover for 2 people looking to disappear. Eleanor handled the bank business, her educated accent and forged documents opening doors. The account Samuel had hidden yielded even more than expected, $120,000 in gold certificates. We could live like kings, Callum marveled as they left the bank. We could, Eleanor agreed. But we won't. They bought a modest house on the outskirts of town, establishing themselves as a respectable couple returning from the mining camps. Eleanor became Mrs. Callum Brady, devoted wife and secret financial genius. Callum found work training horses for the army, his skills valued and his past unquestioned. And quietly, carefully, they began dispersing funds. A family burned out by land grabbers found their mortgage mysteriously paid. A widow whose husband died in a mining accident received an unexpected inheritance. Justice delivered anonymously, balanced against the crimes of the past. How long do you think we can keep this up? Eleanor asked one evening, reviewing their charitable accounts. Long as the money lasts, or until someone figures out who we really are. And then we run again. Find another town, another life. He looked at her across their simple kitchen table. That bother you? No? And she meant it. Home isn't a place. It's who you're with. But even as she spoke, Eleanor felt the past tugging at her. Not regret, never that, but acknowledgement of all they'd done to reach this moment. The blood on their hands would never wash clean, but perhaps they could balance the scales through living well. That night, she stood on their small porch, watching the stars over San Francisco Bay. Callum joined her, solid and warm at her back. Penny for your thoughts? Just thinking about that night you crashed through my window. How far we've come. Any conclusions? Eleanor turned in his arms, seeing in his face the same wild spirit that had recognized hers. Just that some things are worth becoming a killer for, worth any price. Even your soul? My soul was already forfeit in that proper life. You helped me steal it back. She smiled, fierce and free. Besides, I'd rather be damned with you than saved alone. Callum kissed her then, and Eleanor knew that whatever judgment awaited them, from God, law, or society, she'd made the right choice. The banker's widow had traded respectability for truth, safety for freedom, a slow death for a life burning bright. And in the wild edge of America, where fortunes rose and fell with the tides, two outlaws built something beautiful from the ashes of their former lives. Not redemption, perhaps, but something better. A love forged in fire and tempered by choice, strong enough to survive anything the world could throw at them. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but Eleanor didn't need their blessing. She had Callum, and he had her, and together they'd write their own story in blood and gold and the fierce joy of being truly alive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new possibilities. But tonight, in their simple home purchased with complicated money, Eleanor and Callum were exactly where they belonged, together, free and unafraid of the darkness they'd walked through to find their light. The Arizona territory stretched endlessly before them, painted in shades of ochre and sage beneath the burning sun. Eleanor and Callum had built their small ranch in a valley where a spring-fed creek wound between stands of cottonwood and mesquite. 5 years had passed since San Francisco. 5 years of careful moves and new identities, until they'd finally found this place where the past couldn't reach. Eleanor stood on the porch of their adobe house, watching Callum work with a young Mustang in the corral. His movements were patient, gentle, speaking a language older than words. At 32, threads of silver touched his temples, and the harsh sun had carved deeper lines around his eyes, but his hands remained steady, his grace undiminished. "Easy, boy," she heard him murmur to the spooked horse. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." The same words he'd spoken to her all those years ago, in different circumstances. Eleanor smiled, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach where new life grew, a secret she'd share with him tonight. Their ranch wasn't large, 40 acres of good grazing land, a solid barn, the house they'd built with their own hands and legitimate money earned from horse training and careful investments. The blood money from Samuel's accounts had long since been distributed to those who'd been wronged, anonymous gifts that had changed lives across 3 territories. Mrs. Brady. Young Tom Sawyer, not his real name, but the one he'd chosen when he'd shown up half-starved at their gate, came running from the barn. At 14, he was all knees and elbows, reminding Eleanor painfully of Callum's stories about his dead brother. "Shadow's falling! Mister, Brady says come quick!" Eleanor hurried to the barn, where their prize mare lay in the straw. Callum knelt beside her, sleeves rolled up, that focused intensity on his face that she loved. "Breech," he said without looking up. "Need your hands. They're smaller." Eleanor didn't hesitate. 5 years of ranch life had taught her skills no banker's wife would have dreamed of possessing. Together, they worked to turn the foal, their movements synchronized by years of partnership. Tom watched wide-eyed, learning. An hour later, a healthy colt stood on wobbly legs, and Shadow nickered proudly. Eleanor leaned against Callum, both of them covered in sweat and straw. "Good work, partner," he said, kissing her temple. "Likewise." She caught Tom trying to sneak away. "Where do you think you're going? Stalls don't muck themselves." "Yes, ma'am." The boy groaned, but he was grinning. They'd taken Tom in 2 years ago, another lost soul running from something. Like them, he'd needed a place to become someone new. Eleanor had taught him his letters and numbers. Callum had taught him horses and honor. Neither had asked about the scars on his back or the terror that sometimes woke him screaming. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Eleanor noticed Callum's distant expression. She'd learned to read his moods like weather. This was his remembering look, when ghosts came calling. "What is it?" she asked after Tom had gone to bed. "Calendar. Today's the date." She didn't need to ask which date. The anniversary of Rosa's death, carried like a scar that wouldn't fade. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said gently. In 5 years, he'd spoken of his first wife only in fragments. Callum was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was nothing like you. Soft, needed protecting, always smiling, even when things were hard." He met Eleanor's eyes. "I loved her, but I was trying to be someone else for her, someone better than I was. And with me, with you, I can be exactly who I am. All of it, the darkness and whatever light I've got left." He took her hand. "Rosa was my attempt at redemption. You're my acceptance that maybe I don't need redeeming, just understanding." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "She'd be glad you found peace." Would she? I wonder sometimes. If she'd even recognize the man I've become. I think she'd recognize the important parts. The gentleness with horses. The way you protect people who need it. The capacity for love despite everything. He pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her hair. "How'd I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it." She took a breath. "Callum, I have something to tell you." He pulled back, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." She placed his hand on her stomach. "Everything's about to change. But nothing's wrong." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by wonder, then fear. "Eleanor, I know, I'm scared too, but happy scared, if that makes sense." "A baby." He said it like a prayer and a curse combined. "Our baby. Due in spring, near as I can figure." His hands trembled as they framed her face. "I don't know how to be a father. My own was a drunk who beat us till I got big enough to beat him back. What if—" "You're already a father to Tom, and you're nothing like your father. Just like I'm nothing like the woman who would have raised children to be proper and hollow." She kissed him softly. "We'll figure it out together, like we always do." That night, they made love with a tenderness that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Afterward, Callum's hand splayed protectively over her still flat stomach. Boy or girl? He wondered. Girl, Eleanor decided, with your eyes and my stubbornness. God help us. He already has. How else do you explain any of this? The months passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. Tom appointed himself guardian of Eleanor, hovering until she threatened to put him on permanent stall duty. Callum built a cradle with the same attention he gave to training horses. Every joint perfect. Word of the baby spread through their small community. They'd been accepted here as the Bradys, respected for their hard work and fair dealings. If anyone suspected their true identities, they kept it to themselves. The frontier had its own code. You were who you said you were until you proved otherwise. Eleanor's labor began on a night when spring lightning danced across the desert sky. Callum sent Tom racing for Mrs. Martinez, the midwife. While he stayed with Eleanor, she gripped his hand through the contractions, drawing on the same strength that had carried her through gunfights and flight. "I'm here," he kept saying. "I'm not going anywhere." "Better not," she gasped between pains. "I'll shoot you myself if you try." He laughed, the sound shaky but real. "That's my girl." Their daughter arrived with the dawn, screaming her fury at the world. Eleanor laughed through exhausted tears as the baby was placed in her arms, dark hair like Callum's, Eleanor's stubborn chin already evident. "She's perfect," Callum breathed, one finger stroking the impossibly small hand. "What should we name her?" Eleanor asked. "Hope," he said without hesitation. "Because that's what she is." Hope Brady grew strong and wild under the Arizona sun. She could ride before she could properly walk, could shoot by age 6, much to Eleanor's initial dismay and eventual pride, and wrapped every man on the ranch around her tiny finger. Eleanor taught her letters and numbers, but also how to read people, how to trust her instincts. Callum taught her horses and honor, but also how to defend herself, how to survive. They raised her to be free in ways they'd had to fight to become. One evening when Hope was 7, she came to them with a serious expression that meant difficult questions were coming. "Tom says you and Papa aren't my real names," she announced. Eleanor and Callum exchanged glances. They'd always known this day would come. "Tom needs to mind his own business," Callum said mildly. "But is it true?" Eleanor pulled her daughter onto her lap. "What makes a name real, sweetheart?" Hope considered this with the gravity children brought to important matters. "When people call you it. That's part of it. But mostly, a name is real when you choose to make it yours, when you live up to it or live it down." Eleanor smoothed Hope's dark hair. "Brady is our real name because we chose it, because we built a life around it." "But you had other names before?" "Yes," Callum said simply. "Names that belonged to people we used to be." "Were they bad people?" "They were complicated people." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Who did some bad things and some good things, and finally chose to be better." Hope digested this. "Like when Tom stole that pie but then helped fix Mrs. Johnson's fence. Something like that, but bigger." "Okay." Hope slid off Eleanor's lap, apparently satisfied. "Can I have a cookie?" After she'd run off, cookie in hand, Callum shook his head. "That was too easy. She'll have more questions as she gets older. We'll answer them as honestly as we can." Eleanor leaned into him. "She deserves to know where she came from. Eventually." "All of it. Enough of it. The important parts, that her parents chose each other against all odds, that we built something good from something terrible." She smiled. "That we loved her enough to become better people." That night, Eleanor stood in Hope's doorway, watching her daughter sleep. The little girl clutched a wooden horse Callum had carved, her face peaceful in the moonlight, behind Eleanor. Callum's arms encircled her waist. "No regrets?" he asked. "Their old ritual?" "None," she answered as always, but this time added, "Only gratitude." They traveled so far from that night in Dustwater when Eleanor had climbed through a window with a gunslinger. The banker's widow and the outlaw were gone, replaced by ranchers, parents, people who'd earned their happiness through blood and choice and the courage to change. In the morning, there would be horses to train, a ranch to run, a daughter to raise. Tom was talking about staying on permanently, maybe taking over some of the breeding program. Their nearest neighbors, the Johnsons, were coming for Sunday dinner. Simple pleasures that would have seemed impossible in those desperate days of flight. Remember what you said once? Eleanor murmured. About forever being a dangerous word out here. I remember. Still feel that way? Callum turned her to face him, his storm cloud eyes clear and certain. No, forever's just long enough for everything I want to do with you. She kissed him there in the doorway of their daughter's room, in the house they'd built, on the land they'd earned. The kiss tasted of promises kept and futures bright with possibility. Outside, coyotes sang to the rising moon, and the desert wind whispered through the cottonwoods. Inside, a family that shouldn't exist by any reasonable measure settled in for another night of peace, earned through war. Love found through loss, and life rebuilt from the ashes of who they used to be. The banker's widow had ridden at midnight behind the gunslinger she'd sworn to hate. But Eleanor Brady fell asleep each night beside the man she'd chosen to love, their daughter safe down the hall, their past buried deep enough that only love could grow from its grave. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. Not the blood on their hands or the laws they'd broken, but the life they'd built together against all odds. A wild love for wild souls, burning bright beneath the endless Arizona stars. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories of passion and adventure from the American frontier. What did you think of Eleanor and Callum's journey? Share your thoughts, and let's discuss this epic romance together.